Night sits low in the forest near Le Mans. Leather pops, harness creaks. Horses breathe in short white puffs that smell of iron and grass. The king rides at the front with a narrow face and quiet eyes. Heat presses from the crown to the jaw. Dust clings to lips. A banner brushes a helmet with a dry rasp. That soft sound is the spark. The look in the royal eyes empties. Names fall out of them. The hand finds the hilt as if guided by a stranger. Steel slides. The first cut opens a friend. A second man folds with a soft bark of pain. Leaves jump. Birds explode out of the canopy like thrown stones. No one wants to strike the crown. That half-breath of scruple costs blood. A priest shoves a wooden cross between faces. A page tries to grab the wrist and loses skin to the edge. The king lunges, light on his feet, fast the way fear is fast. Guards wrap him in cloaks and pin the arms. The blade rings on the road and spins to a stop. Silence follows like a blanket. The king sags as if a strong hand had untied something inside his chest. His mouth works, his breath frosts. He looks at men whose voices he has known since boyhood, and sees strangers. He whispers, not to touch him. He may break. They carry him into a hunting lodge that smells of smoke and boiled wine. Doors are barred. The queen is still on the road, so uncles sit at the foot of the bed and do not speak. A physician arrives with vinegar and posset and little bags of herbs tied with red thread. He examines the tongue and finds nothing he can write down that would calm a clerk. He bleeds a little from the arm because that is the custom. He mutters of heat and fatigue. The body listens and does as it likes. By dawn, riders leave with sealed pages. Paris hears first and holds its breath. The tale changes as it travels. A demon in the wood. A spell by a Breton woman. Bad air off the marshes. In the palace galleries, servants scatter rushes over dark spots and pretend not to see. In churches, candles burn long after the noon bell. Merchants lower their voices. Bakers watch the price of flour as if that could tell them how a mind heals. There were warnings before this night. A winter of walking until pigeons woke on the roof. A tilt where the king smiled through a friend as through a pain, and then told a joke with tears on his face. No one marked them hard enough. Now the crack in the crown is a line across the map. Uncles will press in. Burgundy will count gates. Orleans will count hands. The queen will learn to speak while men listen for another silence from the royal room. By evening, the king sleeps in linen that smells of beeswax and old water. He keeps his hands close to his chest as if they were made of something that shatters. The chamber knows a new rule. Move slow, speak soft, pray that the glass holds till morning. He began in light. Rems rang like a bell, and gold dust turned in the air over the nave. Oil touched the brow. A boy with soft mouth and clear eyes held a scepter that weighed more than his arm, and did not flinch. Trumpets shook the ribs of the church. Outside, the crowd pressed and sang and smelled of bread and rain. For a moment, the whole realm felt simple. A crown on a young head. Uncles at his side. The road ahead smooth as new wax. The uncles took the keys and said it was for a season. Burgundy tall and calm. Berry sweet with art and coin. Anjou full of schemes that slipped from map to map. The boy watched them walk the corridors like owners and learned in silence. He listened to clerks who spoke of tolls and salt and mills by the river. He learned the shape of hunger in a poor street and the sound of a market that fears new taxes. He liked clean accounts. He liked days when petitions moved. Marriage put a queen beside him. A girl from Bavaria with pale hair and a firm chin. The entry into Paris was a festival of arches and painted saints, almonds and sugar, flowers from balconies. The queen nodded to the crowd, with the serene face of someone who understands the work of being looked at. The king smiled and lifted a child, and the mother wept. The city said beloved and believed it. He took back his rule in a bright year. The little men came to the council, lean faces, ink on their fingers, quick feet. The court called them by a half-playful name, and did not laugh when they began to clear the ledgers. Riverports felt a lighter hand, and swore to keep order. Wells were cleaned. Judges were made to sit the hours they were paid for. The air changed. There was a sense that France could be young again. Shadows sat at the edges, and most eyes skipped them. A fever after a long hunt, a week when sleep would not come, and he walked the gallery until pigeons woke on the roof. A joust where he looked through a friend as through glass, and then laughed and embraced him with tears on his face. The physician spoke of humours and sent syrups that smelled of roses. The priest advised rest and small meat. The uncles muttered about the pace of reform. The king ignored the hints because the crowd answered with cheers. Coins rang true. The roads carried grain rather than armed men. The court felt smooth and bright. Far away, the old quarrels were only a hum in the rafters. No one saw the cliff that lay between summer and autumn. The horse would carry him into the forest near Le Mans, and the light would change, and the gentle age would learn what glass sounds like when it cracks. They rode back to Paris with shutters closed on the litters. The road smelled of damp wheat and iron. At the palace doors, the crowd pressed but kept its eyes down. The king was carried through corridors that remembered his laughter and now learned to hush. A chamber was stripped to stone. Thick rugs. A brazier. Bowls of vinegar set under the bed to sweeten the air. Physicians came in soft shoes with leather cases. They opened a vein to lighten heat. They pressed cups to the skin and drew dark circles that looked like bruises from another world. They spoke of melancholia and choler and the need for rest and small meat. Priests brought relics and low psalms for the hours before dawn. Exorcists waited in a side room because a rumor walks faster than reason when a crown shakes. For days, he watched his own hands as if they belonged to someone he barely trusted. A servant set a cup down and the king flinched as if a bell had cracked. He ate little. He slept in bursts. Then the fog thinned. Names returned. He wept without sound when he learned who lay in the chapel. He asked for paper and sent alms to widows, whose faces he could not bear to see. The court called it God's mercy and stepped forward on careful feet. The city breathed again. Markets filled. Bells found their old rhythm. The uncles moved in at once. Burgundy set his men in the halls. Orleans counted friends and made new ones with coin and soft words. The queen learned quickly how to sit and listen while older mouths made plans around her chair. When the king sat with them, he sat like a man who had crossed ice and now felt it bending again under his boots. Clerks learned to write 2 sets of drafts, one for clear days, one for days when the royal gaze slid off familiar faces. To prove strength, the palace reached for show. Masses with long trains of light, rides through streets heavy with garlands, a hunt for play within walls that could be closed if the air darkened. In winter the court masked, a dance to blunt fear. Torches hissed. Music climbed the beams. The king and companions dressed as wild men in pitch and tow. A torch strayed. Flame leapt as if it had waited all night, and 4 bodies became cries and smoke. Reports differ about the hands that saved the king beneath a heavy skirt and a rush of fabric that smothered spark. The city called it a warning. Priests spoke of pride and of fires fed by hidden sin. Physicians spoke of vapors stirred by heat and wine. The palace heard only that luck had a short temper. Intervals of clarity returned like windows opened in summer and slammed by a sudden gust. Between them, the fear of breaking took a shape. He held his arms close as if they were brittle. He asked that chairs be set with cushions thick as folded cloaks. Scribes were told to use larger writing. Courtiers learned to move slowly when they came near. In the streets, a new habit settled. When bells sounded for royal progress, people cheered with lips that barely smiled. They had learned that a day of light could end in a night of glass. The illness learned the calendar faster than the council. It came in tides. Weeks of light returned, and the king moved like a man stepping back onto ground that had held him since childhood. He heard petitions, signed charters, rode out under banners that smelled of rain. He laughed at a hunting story and asked for more ink. Clerks dared to breathe. The city opened its shutters wide. Then, without storm or omen, the room tilted again. Names slid off faces. The gaze went blank as winter glass. Servants folded the day like a map and hid it. The household built signals to survive the swing. A white glove on the gilded hook meant no audience. A green candle at the door meant quiet progress and short answers only. When the candle burned to half, the council ended whether the agenda was done or not. Physicians kept a ledger of hours and weather. They bled him when heat ran high, purged him when sleep would not come, warmed wine with cinnamon and grated horn and swore they saw improvement. Priests brought relics from St. Denis and led barefoot processions around the palace garden. Astrologers watched Mars lean over the roof and said, "Wait until the next hour passes." Security rewrote itself each time the tide turned. Cupbearers tasted everything twice. Cooks boiled wine until it thickened like syrup and called it strength. The queen learned to move like water. On clear mornings, she stood a half step behind the throne and let him speak. On dark mornings, she received ambassadors in a small chamber and called it courtesy, while a notary waited with the signet. Burgundy and Orleans watched her hands and counted favors. The city watched bread prices and learned to hear in them the mood of the crown. Some days were strangely gentle. The king would walk the gallery and greet a guard with the shy gravity of a child. He would ask a clerk to write larger so letters would not cut him. He held his arms close to his ribs and asked for cushions on every chair. He feared touch, even from love. At other times, fear hardened into fury as brief as lightning. A page moved too fast. A door latch clicked. The court froze. Cloaks closed around the royal shoulders, and the world narrowed to a bedchamber with psalms in a low key. Each remission bred hope that the tide had finally turned. Orders went out. Taxes were trimmed for a market street that had starved in winter. Repairs began on a gatehouse that had sagged since the last siege. Then the water rose, and workmen went home, and letters were held in drawers. Ministers learned to write decisions in two hands. One for days of light with long sentences and plans. One for nights of glass with short lines that could be obeyed without thought. The rhythm marked the realm. Priors timed fasts to quiet weeks. Judges scheduled assizes for months when the physicians promised a steady pulse. Pilgrims whispered that a hair shirt worn by a king can save a city. Ironists in taverns answered that a city must learn to hold its breath. Between those two sentences, France found its pace, stepping on stones that were never dry for long, and praying not to slip before morning. The fear takes a shape that can be sewn. Tailors arrive with bolts of velvet and with things they never brought before. Whalebone, thin iron ribs, felt by the armful. They lay out a doublet on a long table and stitch a cage inside the cloth. Stays cross the chest. Pads bloom at the hips and elbows. A hood is lined so thick a hand sinks to the knuckle. The garment looks like armor made by a pillow maker. The king puts it on and breathes as if the air had turned to sugar. He can move. He cannot break. That is how the room must speak to him, or the room itself becomes a threat. Chairs are remade, cushions stacked 3 deep. Corners of tables are wrapped with soft leather. Door frames are padded with lamb's wool. A guard walks before him with a narrow screen of quilted cloth so that no sudden touch can reach the royal ribs. Pages learn to carry a small cushion in the crook of the arm. When the king stops, they raise it like a priest raises a book, and he rests a hand there, as if setting down a precious bowl. He asks that letters be written large because fine lines look like cracks. He asks that courtiers keep a pace slow enough for a man who must not jar. Ceremony becomes a game of careful steps. A threshold halts a procession because the king will not risk a misjudged footfall. The council waits while felt is laid in a strip across the join of stone. A mass is delayed until a chair can be padded to the right depth. In winter, the household warms stones at the fire and wraps them so that the floor will feel kind under the royal shoes. The court learns to hold breath when he sits. If the chair settles and makes a sound like a sigh, 2 men close their eyes as if that alone could keep the glass from splintering. Physicians name the season and the wind and talk of cold humors that stiffen thought. They bleed a little and give syrups that smell of rose and cinnamon. They advise baths just warm and long prayers. They ask for patience and write neat notes for the archive that say the king was calmer at terce and unsettled again at vespers. Priests bring relics and place them under silk. The king touches them with the back of his hand, like a man testing the temperature of water. Servants carry this world outward. In the city, a tailor copies the cut and sells a padded jacket to a clerk who fears winter ice. A juggler tells a song about a man who turned to glass and learned to cross a street without breaking. The palace does not punish the song because it ends with a prayer for the king. Rumor writes that he sleeps on straw, and that is sometimes true. It writes that he forbids music, and that is sometimes false. Truth is narrower. He lives each hour by the rule that soft things save him. In the long gallery, a window shows the city. The king stands with hands close to his chest and looks as if Paris itself were made of glass. Bridges thin as blades. Roofs that would shatter if a bell rang too hard. A realm that must be carried on cushions from one day to the next. The court understands the picture and hates it and obeys it. The fear is not a fancy now. It is furniture. It is law written in felt and bone and slow steps. It is the shape of power when a living crown believes it might break. The fits arrive like a hand that blows out a candle. One moment, the room is ordinary breath and cloth and ink. The next, it is a cave. The king stares as if the world had stepped back from him. Then movement pours through his limbs, with no cause that men can name. Servants know the signs too late each time. The hiss of a latch, the soft scrape of a boot, the bell at Saint Denis taking the hour in the wrong key. All at once he is on his feet, and the chamber is an echo. Sometimes he strips as if cloth burned. He runs the length of the gallery under torches that make his skin look like pearl and ash. He shouts names of saints, and then denies that any saint hears. He demands water, and when the jug comes, he lifts both hands and begs them not to pour for fear that the splash will crack him. Pages trail with quilts to screen him from touch. Guards kneel rather than block his path and pray that the rushes are thick. Sometimes the world loses its labels. He looks at the queen and sees a stranger. He looks at a sun and sees a shadow. He asks where the king has gone and why they keep his chamber when the true king is surely still on the road. That thought lifts him and then drops him. He hides in a recess and begs with both palms held out that no one should brush against his ribs. the room moves like beasts around a sleeping hunter. One cough can wake a storm. At other hours, the fear hardens into quick violence. A scribe flinches, and the king tears at his sleeve as if pulling off a snake. A priest holds up a crucifix, and the king shoves it away and sobs as if he had struck a child. He grows light and dangerous, quick as a cat, then falls to his knees and asks for silence with his hands. The answers pile up like tools and fix little. Physicians cup and bleed and give syrups that sweeten the mouth and calm nothing. Priests murmur psalms and lay relicks on linen. An exorcist waits in a side room and is sent away because the queen will not let the city say that devils sit at the council table. Afterward, a clerk writes the hour and the wind, and whether meat was taken and whether names returned by vespers. The palace builds fences of habit. Meals are served at the same small times with the same small dishes. Doors are wrapped so latches do not click. At night, a watch sits in the corridor with felt screens ready. When the fit passes, he asks for cushions, and the largest hand in the room writes a prayer in letters as wide as a thumb. He reads it like a sailor testing a rope in rain. The city hears what it can through walls. A groom says the king ran in his shirt. A nun says the queen did not sleep. A merchant says the bells spoke wrong. The truth is simpler and more terrible. The court has learned to live inside a storm that has no weather. Decisions wait until the glass goes quiet. Then men rush to stamp seals before the next wind. Power learns to move around the bed like a cat. When the king is clear, the council sits straight. The seal lies on a velvet cushion, and orders run like water. When the gaze goes blank, the room reorganizes itself in a single breath. A screen is drawn. The queen steps forward with a voice that never rises. On one side stands Burgundy, tall men in dark cloth, neat ledgers, the smell of Flemish wool and coin. On the other side, Orleans, silk and wit, new pensions promised in a hand that writes fast. The same bell marks their hours. Two futures tug at the same rope. Mechanics decide more than speeches. The Great Seal is a small sun. Whoever holds it makes the day. Notaries change tables. A clerk warms wax and waits for a nod from the Queen's eye. She does not call it rule. She calls it keeping the house quiet until grace returns. Yet her household swells. Her brothers find rooms. And Paris learns a new word for influence that begins with her name. She receives envoys in a chamber with low light and lets them speak until their own requests sound dangerous to them. She signs little. She remembers much. Burgundy plays long. He fills offices with steady men, trims taxes where merchants grumble, buys the love of guilds with privileges written clean. He calls it the peace of towns. Orleans plays close. He hugs the court, fattens the royal household, finds coins by squeezing tolls and selling futures, and buys friends with warmth and quick rescue. He calls it the king's generosity. Each writes an ordinance on Tuesday that the other pries up on Thursday when the glass darkens and doors change hands. The city feels the tug like a boat on split currents. Butchers cheer one name. Lawyers whisper another. Students drink to a third and change their mind by dawn. Barges on the Seine carry chests that clink for one camp at noon and for the other by vespers. In the streets, pamphlets bloom and die between rain showers. Bakers watch the price of flour as if it were prophecy. Priests preach patience and count guards at the doors. In the palace, the rhythm hardens into habit. When clarity breaks, Burgundy's men appear with neat files. When the fog lifts, Orleans smiles and rescues favorites from corners. Pardons are granted and revoked and granted again. Treaties are drafted twice. The realm becomes two shadows cast by the same crown. No blood yet, only sharper elbows, quiet threats, ledgers that do not match, and a queen who learns to walk between points of steel without letting her gown brush either. The crack in one mind becomes a fault line across a kingdom. The names will come later for these camps. The split is already here. A kingdom without a steady hand learns to move by twitch. Orders contradict by noon. Guards change badges by night. Paris keeps one ear on the palace and the other on the river, where rumor comes in with flour. In the galleries, the king has a clear day, and the wax warms and seals fly. Then the glass returns, and every pen lifts. Into this pause steps calculation sharpened into steel. One evening a prince rides under torchlight near the St. Innocents. Hoofbeats on wet stone. Pages close ranks. A knot of men bursts from shadow. Knives find their work. The body falls and the street drinks. In the morning walls bloom with small papers that call the act justice. The dead man's house swears revenge. A city that once argued over taxes now whispers new words for sides. Some say the queen knew more than she showed. Some say a cousin played surgeon to the state. Proof thins in the telling. Blood remains. The split hardens. Butchers and craftsmen cheer one banner. Lawyers and students drink for the other. Ordinances swing like doors in a windstorm. New captains swear to cleanse the city and drag nobles to prison by their lace. Bells ring for reform, and then for mercy, and then for fear. In the prisons, men write short prayers in soot on their own sleeves. The king receives reports and nods to both camps, because on those days he recognizes no one for long. The chair under him feels too hard. Cushions are fetched. The audience ends in soft steps. Across the water, a third player counts ships. England smells the crack like rain. A young king with quick eyes lands on beaches that knew old wars and moves through hedges and mud. Banners tilt. Archers plant stakes and step back. French lords argue over precedence and sleep light in wet armor. Morning brings the long hiss of arrows and the short cries of heavy men who cannot rise in clay. A bright day for a foreign crown is a low bell in Paris. The realm feels its bones. After defeat come papers. Treaties written in neat hands that say who will rule when one man dies and who will be called son and who will be called nothing. A prince is told he is disinherited. He retreats south to a river town and rules from narrow rooms, with loyal clerks and tired captains. Pamphlets call him hopeful. Others name him the Shadow. The queen moves between courts with a face that gives nothing away. Some blame her for the seal. Some pity her for the bed. The truth is that a woman in that corridor can only choose where to stand when men shout. The disease in one body has become the map. Towns change masters without a siege. Roads that once carried wine now carry armed processions that pray and search for coin. In the royal room, a calm day returns, and the king smiles like a man waking from a dream and asks whether the harvest looks sound. He is told that it will depend on weather. It always depends on weather. The minister bows. Outside the window, the wind changes. The kingdom leans with it. The men who tended him believed in humors. They balanced heat with bleeding, drew cups that raised purple moons on skin, burned herbs until the chamber smelled clean and strange. When fear sharpened, they brought psalms and relics and said the right hours aloud. What they saw was real to them. A mind that cleared, a mind that clouded, a man who would not be touched for fear of shattering, who ran, who struck, who wept, who asked where the king had gone. They wrote it in neat hands as if order could hold it still. From a long distance, the pattern is clearer and still uncertain. The attacks come in waves with days of bright reason between them. There is sudden violence that feels uncalled. There is misrecognition of faces once loved. There is naked flight through halls and a plea for cushions and soft light. There is the fixed belief that the body is brittle as glass. The list fits more than one key. A modern doctor might think of periodic psychosis. Another might say a bipolar illness with times of agitation and times of clear talk. Another might suggest a long disorder that waxes and wanes and sometimes breaks into terror. Each would speak in careful tones because the room is 600 years away. The glass itself is not a trick. Others in that age told the same fear. Scholars and princes who feared breaking wore padded clothes and avoided chairs with hard arms. It reads like a cultural script handed to a mind under strain. Men who lived with sharp ritual and sudden violence reached for an image that explained fragility in a world of iron and stone. Call it a delusion if you must. It also reads like a metaphor, the body believed. Rumors try to explain what reason cannot touch. Poison in a cup. A fever taken on the hunt. Bad air from Paris streets that turned a thought dark. He tilted and he jousted, and so a hidden blow is imagined. Truth stays smaller. Heat, exhaustion, sleepless weeks, infections that we cannot name, a temperament that held too tightly to its own storms. These are likely causes, and none is a final key. So we are left with a man who could rule well on Monday and be lost to himself on Tuesday. The physicians did what their art allowed. The priests did what comfort allows. The court learned to live with two kings in one body. That is the fact that matters. The diagnosis is a word. The reign is a house built to keep glass from breaking, and it still cut every hand that touched it. The queen learns the palace by touch. Velvet on the banister, cold stone through thin slippers at dawn. Keys that bite the palm. When the glass mood lifts, she stands a half step behind the throne and lets the king speak. When the fog rolls in, she receives men in a smaller room where candles burn low and a notary waits with warm wax. Her name is Isabeau of Bavaria. Paris calls her many names. Some are prayers. Some are knives. She builds a household because someone must. Tailors, apothecaries, tutors, midwives. A chaplain who can whisper comfort without making news. She moves money where bread runs short and calls it devotion. She moves money where allies grow thin and calls it grace. Enemies call it waste and whisper of gowns heavy with pearls. They whisper worse, a rumor that tries to turn policy into sin. It travels because the city needs a face for its hunger. Truth is plainer. She keeps a sick kingdom walking and pays for it in love that curdles. Children step through these rooms like small torches. Isabella first, bright and grave, sent to a foreign king still more boy than husband and returned later with eyes older than her years. John of Touraine, clever and pale, Dauphin for a breath and gone to a winter fever. Louis of Guyenne, groomed like a blade to fit the hand of power, dead at 19, while the court held its breath and counted physicians. Catherine with the soft voice and steady gaze, the one who will be bartered last and hardest. The cradle fills and empties and fills again. Names are stitched on swaddling cloth and unpicked by autumn. The queen teaches each child a different path because the realm demands many kinds of coin. One must smile at processions, one must keep a ledger clean, one must marry where maps meet. Isabella is handed across the sea with music and grave faces and learns the taste of solitude in a borrowed court. Catherine will later be given to a victor to seal a treaty written while the glass lay heavy. She will carry a crown into a foreign bed and a child back the other way. Between those two journeys stands a line of sons who do not live to wear what was measured for them. The palace is a school without mercy. Tutors recite law while the king walks soft-footed in padded clothes and fears the angle of a chair. On clear days, he kisses small foreheads and laughs at a misread line. On dark days, he does not know his own. The children learn to listen for the sound of clips on the corridor floor, the pace that means mother will speak for father. They learn to celebrate quietly and to hide their games when the key turns twice. Outside, men make doctrine out of grief. One faction writes that the queen spends what the poor earn. Another writes that she has given the realm to a cousin. A treaty arrives that sets aside an heir and marries a daughter to a conqueror. The parchment is smooth. The wound is not. South along the Loire, a thin boy gathers loyal clerks and a few hard captains and grows into a man while the capital hisses his name. He will wear the crown one day and call himself the seventh of his line. For now, he is only a pale flame kept from the wind. At night, the queen walks the chapel and leaves small coins on the rail. Beeswax breathes. Stone holds its cold. She asks for a simple gift. One clear morning after another. Enough to get children through their lessons. Enough to sign one more safe order. She is not a saint. She is a hinge. The door moves because she does, and the door will close on her when the house no longer needs her hands. Paris wakes to bells and cartwheels on wet stone. Smoke from morning hearths curls low over the river. Bakers pull loaves and learn the mood of the crown from flour and rumor. If the price eases, men say the king slept. If it bites, they say the glass returned. Women stand at fountains and trade the news like bread. The city has become a barometer for a mind it cannot see. Guilds carry their tempers like tools. Butchers and skinners love strong hands and quick justice. Students and clerks prefer parchments and promises. Priests preach patience and walk home by alleys when torchlight grows thick. One season the men of the knives swell into bands that call themselves good friends of order. They drag judges from chambers and rewrite rules with cudgels and lists. Another season the lawyers answer with armed patrols and neat proclamations that place new collars on the same necks. Names change. The fear stays. Processions try to cool the blood. Relics pass under awnings. Candles weep on linen. A banner of the Virgin blinks in the wind that runs along the Seine. The king appears on clear days in a padded gown that makes him look smaller. People kneel because the body kneels. They bless him because habit is a kind of hope. Children reach out and are pulled back before they touch the royal sleeve for fear the touch might crack a man. Riot has its own calendar. Winter brings hunger and short temper. Summer brings heat and bad air from the markets. A shout at the Châtelet grows into a crowd at the Hall. Someone swears that a baker hid grain. Someone swears that a minister hides coin. Heads appear on poles, and then disappear when the wind changes. Troops march and then melt into alleys. The city learns to clean blood before it freezes. England's colours walk the streets after a treaty written when the crown was heaviest with fog. Some cheer for bread, some spit for pride. Most keep eyes low and count days. South on the Loire, a thin prince collects clerks and captains and sends letters across hedgerows like seeds. In Paris, people read them at night and fold them into shoe soles. By habit and hunger, the capital keeps the realm alive between fits. Bridges hold. Mills turn. Bells mark the hours, even when names fail. The people carry the crown by moving as if it still weighed the same. That is how a city survives a glass king. Glass was not a fancy in this age. It was work. In the faubourgs, men blew lungs raw at the pipe and drew bright panes for churches and thin beakers for noble tables. Fire sang. Bubbles shivered and burst. A craftsman turned and the new sheet cooled too fast and cracked with a clean little cry. Everyone knew that sound. The court heard it and thought of the king. The image spread because it fit the objects people touched. Windows flowered in cathedrals. Pilgrims stared up at saints set in blue and ruby and learned that light can live inside a breakable skin. Fine goblets made a feast glitter and then died in a thumb of clumsy hand. Mirrors were rare and showed a face as if on water. Fragility was everywhere you looked, and in the palace it had a crown. So the word glass stopped being only a substance. It became a law. Move softer, pad the corners, slow the pen. Pray that nothing knocks against the ribs of France. Clerks learned to write around the fear. Ordinances spoke of calm, of reason, of order, and in their margins a second rule took shape. Do not startle the realm. Do not bang the table. Deliver justice as if carrying a bowl brimful. The queen ordered cushions for benches in rooms where she needed men to stay. Governors cut taxes a hair in market towns so tempers would not shatter. Ambassadors were coached to speak in low rooms with warm wine and no sudden news. The metaphor turned into method. Priests leaned on it too. Sermons praised patience in a world of brittle things. Stained windows washed chancels with the kind of light that forgives rough stone. Processions walked slowly with relics raised high and wrapped as if they themselves could break. A conspiracy of softness grew. Not mercy, prudence. A way to keep a sick crown from cutting the hands that fed it. There were men who laughed and called it womanish. They sharpened knives and promised hardness. Yet even they lowered their voices when the bells began to falter. The city had learned to measure itself by tremor. You could feel it in bridges that took one cart at a time, in councils that made decisions in small pieces, in the habit of touching wood before speaking a dangerous name. The Glass King did not invent fragility. He revealed it. He made the whole country move as if it carried a pain across a crowded street. Winter leans on Paris, and the king thins like a candle in a draught. Fires are fed, and still the chamber stays cold. The padded doublet has grown heavier as the body inside it has grown light. He keeps his hands close to his ribs and watches dust fall through a shaft of grey noon, as if it were snow inside a globe. Some days he knows names. He asks for a psalm and mouths the lines with a soft smile that belongs to no court. Other days he studies his fingers and whispers that no one must brush them. The servants move with the quiet of thieves who steal nothing. Physicians have given up their bravest syrups. They warm stones and wrap them. They bleed no more. They count the hours when his breath is even and call that improvement. Priests come with oil and low voices. The unction is simple and smells of olives and beeswax. In the gallery, a tapestry stirs and then hangs still. That is all a kingdom can hope for now. Politics keeps breathing while the chamber shrinks. A treaty on smooth parchment has promised the crown to a foreign line when this life ends. Men argue over whether ink can overrule blood. South along the Loire, a thin prince grows into himself among clerks and old soldiers. North, in Paris, men practice the names they will shout when bells begin. The queen walks the corridor with her veil low and speaks little. Rumor tries to make her large or small. She is only a hinge that still turns. On a clear morning, he asks for light to be let in, and for the window to be latched again at once. He smiles at the chill and turns his face from it. Memory flickers. He sees a hawk glove and a river bridge and bread torn with salt. He sees a chapel lit for a coronation when the world was honey and gold dust turned in the air. He says a child's prayer and forgets a word and does not mind. By evening, the glass feeling has softened into sleep. The breath grows shallow and steady, as if the body has found a pace it can keep without a mind. Candles are snuffed to coals. The last hour passes without drama. The room does not break. The king's mouth opens once, like a man about to answer, and then stays quiet. Outside, frost draws ferns across the leaded panes. In the morning, bells roll over the city like slow water. Horses black as wells carry men in dark cloth. Drapes are tied with cords the color of wine. People lift their hats and look at the stones. A page who was a child when this began stands with his hands stacked at his belt and counts each toll. The glass is set down at last. The kingdom is still a bowl brimming. It will be carried by other hands. After death, the story grows taller than the man. Scribes bind the reign into a single image, and the image travels easier than minutes of counsel. The glass king becomes a parable that explains everything at once. Why Burgundy rose? Why Orleans bled in a street? Why a treaty put a foreign name before a son? A mind that cracked is a small key that opens too many doors. It comforts the victors. It excuses the losers. It turns weather into will. The record is rougher. Years of clear talk broken by months of fog. Good orders signed between fits. Taxes eased and then raised when armies needed bread. Ministers who learned to time a decision to a morning of light. A queen who kept the house upright with soft hands and a ledger. A city that carried the crown by doing its work under bells that did not miss an hour. Madness did not rule alone. Habit and hunger did most of the ruling. After 1422, two roads try to run on the same map. North, the child Henry is hailed by men who read the treaty as scripture. South, the thin prince in the Loire, Towns learns to be Charles by degrees. Years later, a girl in armor will bring him to Rheims and teach the realm to breathe in a single rhythm again for a season. None of that erases what came before. The habits forged in the glass, years stay. Soft steps, quiet seals, the instinct to lower a voice when a door is closed. Chroniclers shape the past to warn the future. Some draw a monster and make the court a nest of sin. Some draw a saint trapped in a cruel machine and spare the ministers. Neither picture is clean. The court failed and endured at once. It hid violence in cushions and wrote fear into schedules. It kept bridges standing and let streets run with blood. That double truth is harder to sing than a fable. So the fable wins until someone opens old files and counts rents, candles, bolts of felt, bundles of straw. If there is a verdict, it is this: fragility became a system. A single terrified body taught a continent how much of power is choreography. Pad the corners, slow the pace, spread decisions across many hands so no single hand can break. In that lesson lies both mercy and control. A crown of glass forced a nation to behave as if everything might shatter. Much did. Much did not. What remains is the sound the age learned to love most. Not trumpets, not drums, the hush of a door, closing without a click, and a city that keeps moving because it must.